Hello, my name is Brian Romacco, and today we're going to be talking about plantar fasciitis. There's a lot of people out there who say, oh, I have chronic plantar fasciitis. I have plantar fasciitis. I was diagnosed with plantar fasciitis. I Googled my symptoms. I have plantar fasciitis. And while you may have plantar fasciitis, there's a lot of people out there who think they do and don't. Because there's a lot of other problems that can mimic plantar fasciitis. And in fact, I'm going to start talking about how plantar fasciitis typically is not the correct term. Even if the plantar fascia is what is creating the pain, um, it is typically not an itis. Even though if you Google, foot pain, you see itis, itis, itis. And in fact, I've had to use that term when I haven't had enough time to explain properly. I've used that term just out of necessity because it's so commonly used, plantar fasciitis. Researchers, even if they want to use the correct term, if they want to look at all the past research, they use plantar fasciitis just to make sure they catch it all, because the term has been misused in the medical community for so long. And actually, I've still seen research papers using the incorrect term. So what is the correct term? Well, most plantar fasciitis is plantar fasciosis. Itis implies inflammation. Itis means inflammation. So that's the immune system. That's your immune cells. That's inflammatory. That's your immune cells breaking something down or attacking something. In some sort of autoimmune condition, you can have an itis. With an infection, you can have an itis. Now, what's an osis? Why am I saying that most of these are osis? Well, particularly if you have a chronic problem, it might be an osis because osis is degenerative. So osteoarthritis is an osis. You can have people who have chronic tendinitis. That's not really an itis, it's an osis. Chronic plantar fasciitis is most likely an osis as well. This is degenerative tissue. So it's not painful and swollen and weak because of an inflammatory process. For the most part, it's possible, but for the most part, it might be degenerative and weak of a combination of overuse and the body sort of mismanaging upkeep. And if your body is mismanaging upkeep, some combination, right? So you can have just mismanaging upkeep, or you can have just overuse, or somewhere in between. And the tendon, or in this case, the plantar fascia, which acts very much like a tendon, it becomes sort of swollen, or it looks swollen under imaging, and it is full of neovascularization, and it is basically weakened, and it's tender, right? It's tender. You can, if you're one of the people watching who has chronic plantar fasciitis, you know how tender it can be. So we have chronic plantar fasciitis. Most of the time, it's chronic plantar fasciosis is the correct diagnosis. Not an itis for the most part, it's an osis. Okay, now how do you diagnose it? Well, if I have my foot here, most tests start with the windlass test. So the plantar fascia, sort of, we have the Achilles tendon that comes down to the heel, and it sort of goes over the heel, and then it sort of turns into the plantar fascia, which goes over all the muscular structures on the bottom of the foot, and it sort of covers all of that and heads towards the toes. So the windlass test, now none of these tests are 100% accurate, but to make an educated guess that it's the plantar fascia causing someone's pain, is you press, sort of, we have our heel here, the calcaneus bone, and we come on the inside sort of front corner, and so we push in there, and that might be tender. A few things can cause that tenderness, so there's a few structures there. So we get pressure there, and maybe we have a little bit of pain, but we want to see if that pain increases when we take the toe and we pull the toe back, because that is going to increase the pressure, the tension on the plantar fascia. So if that increases pain, that indicates it might be a plantar fasciosis, the plantar fascia resulting in pain. When I first got into ultrasound imaging, and I am registered in musculoskeletal sonography. And when I first started scanning people's chronic plantar fasciosis, now ultrasound is basically 100% accurate at diagnosing plantar fasciosis or plantar fasciitis. You can definitely see it thickened and swollen and dark, meaning it's full of fluid, if they have plantar fasciitis or fasciosis, and it's much, much thinner if it's healthy. It's thinner and you can see all the fibers, and it's just so evident on ultrasound. So another way, of course, of checking to see if it is in fact from the plantar fascia and not something else is to get a musculoskeletal ultrasound. Some surgeons are trained in it. Not all sonographers out of sonography school are trained in MSK ultrasound. It is not standard procedure, and most ultrasound schools don't even offer it as a specialty. So it's not everywhere, but some chiropractors, some physiotherapists, some podiatrists will have access to ultrasound and can take a picture, and it's an easy diagnosis. Basically, if close to the heel, if it's greater than 4 millimeters and looks darkened, then it's plantar fasciitis. If it's less than 4 millimeters thick and looks its normal sort of whitish fibrillar appearance, then it's normal and healthy. So let's say you do that, you get checked out, and it's not plantar fasciitis, but you have pain. What else could it be? Well, the other things it could be is it could be the posterior tibial tendon or the tibialis posterior muscles tendon. There's two words for the same muscle or same tendon. So this tendon starts way up the leg, comes all the way down around the bone here, and attaches basically in the vicinity here, and it holds up the arch. In fact, if you have an acquired flat foot, basically you had an arch and all of a sudden one day it sort of flattened out, chances are that that muscle or that tendon has torn. Now, good news for you is that once diagnosed, they can repair that tendon. And particularly if it hasn't been for too long and there hasn't been too much damage from the sort of joints being sort of misaligned from being flat for too long. The prognosis is good for repairing that tendon and restoring proper function of your foot. But issues with that tendon, a tendinosis, basically a tender and degenerated tendon tears, full tendon ruptures, it's so often misdiagnosed, we actually don't have good numbers for it. One study found that it was misdiagnosed or missed 85% of the time. So, and what were they diagnosed with? Plantar fasciitis for the most part. So that's the reason I'm making this video, because your pain might not be chronic plantar fasciitis. Well, it's either chronic plantar fasciosis or it's a handful of other things. In particular, this tendon issue, and if it's a full rupture, get the surgery, get it fixed. If it's a tendinosis, then you can get treatment for tendinosis. And so you can get this problem resolved properly when you have a proper diagnosis. Another thing that it can be, and I noticed this when I started scanning, I'd look and the plantar fascia was fine. And then I would scan over the foot and I'd start seeing the muscles, and they were oddly dark. And on ultrasound, if you have a really dark section in a muscle, it can indicate a myofascial trigger point. So I saw that, I'm like, well, plantar fascia is fine and they have pain. So I went in here and I pushed on it, and they said, yeah, that's my pain. And I held pressure. And that's the way to get rid of a myofascial trigger point, either with needles or with pressure. So I held pressure, and within 10 to 30 seconds, the pain started to go down for them. So I increased pressure, pain started to go, increased pressure, started to go down, and sort of repeat that increasing pressure every time the pain decreases until they have no pain. You might have to sort of explore to see if they have more of them. But if it's a muscle knot, that treatment works. If it's not a muscle knot, that treatment doesn't work. So I love that treatment because it's also diagnostic. It tells me whether their pain is from a myofascial trigger point or not. And if it's from myofascial trigger points and you do that treatment, and if they're afterwards they can walk and their pain is nothing, then that was their problem. It was just myofascial trigger points. And that treatment I just described can be done at home. It's a very safe treatment. Even if you have plantar fasciosis, you're not going to hurt yourself with that treatment of just finding the tender spot and holding pressure in hopes that the pain starts to drop. Normally, you apply pressure until pain reaches about 5 out of 10. And it might not drop all the way to 0 because if there's a nearby muscle knot, you're only squeezing one, you're pulling on another one nearby. But once you notice it drop, try to increase the pressure. See if you can get multiple drops, and if plateaus, explore for other muscle knots. Other things it can be in the foot is it can be nerve. So if it's more electrical, if it's more tingly, particularly if it's involving the skin, then it can be superficial nerves, cutaneous nerves. And there are cutaneous nerves that sort of cross near the ankle that can cause sort of shooting, burning pains in this vicinity, and sometimes over the top of the foot as well. So it's not just sciatica or back pain that can result in nerve symptoms down the leg. You have, of course, nerves everywhere. So even right at the ankle, so ankle down, you can have a nerve issue. Now you can have myofascial trigger points in the leg refer pain all the way down to the foot, even the bottom of the foot. And depending on how people's brains and spinal cords are structured, the neurology, I've worked on people's butts, and I press on their butt muscles and I say, oh yeah, that's my foot pain. And I'm nowhere near the sciatic nerve. But their brain is interpreting pain in their butt muscles as pain in their foot. So the body can be confusing. But anyway, here, these muscles, what do these muscles do? Well, most of them attach to the ankle. Some of them actually go all the way down and attach to the bottom of the foot. So muscle pain here, myofascial trigger points here, can send pain, and the pain can be interpreted as the foot. So sometimes people have foot pain and it's not here, it's here. So just like for the bottom of the foot, if you start pushing up here and you push somewhere and you start to feel a spreading pain, that might be a myofascial trigger point. You can continue to apply pressure and use that procedure. That procedure is called ischemic compression, to try to eliminate that muscle knot if you find it and see if that helps your symptoms. The last thing it could be is it could be the bones of the foot. There are a lot of tiny bones here in the foot, just like we have a lot of bones in our wrist. We have a lot of bones in our foot, and they can become a little uncomfortable, just a little out of place. I don't want to say out of place, because they're not necessarily dislocated, but they can be out of alignment enough to be uncomfortable when you put weight on them. This can be a sign that, in some cases, this is a sign that you require surgery and fusion. This can be a sign that maybe you do have a full rupture of that posterior tibial tendon. This sometimes can be resolved with just joint manipulation, just pushing the joints sort of back and forth. A chiropractor or a physiotherapist sometimes does it. Sometimes it's a miracle visit. I just push on the person's foot a little bit and they're like, oh, it doesn't click anymore and it feels great. So I just wanted to get today just to teach you about what it could be. I didn't go through all the solutions for all of the problems, but I just wanted you to be aware. And of course, the one problem which is easily solvable, that myofascial trigger points and ischemic compression, I'm hoping this video can cure a few people. That would be wonderful. That would make my day. So I hope you found this video informative. I wish you the best of luck. Cheers.